more than 4 billion people are alive today because of a machine most have never heard of. Not a computer, not an engine, not even a medical breakthrough, a chemical reactor. Inside it, nitrogen from the air is forced to combine with hydrogen under enormous pressure and intense heat, producing ammonia, the foundation of modern nitrogen fertilizer. Every day, thousands of these reactors operate around the world, quietly supplying the nutrients that sustain crops on nearly every continent. Their impact reaches far beyond agriculture. Scientists estimate that roughly half of the nitrogen in the proteins of the human body today ultimately came from ammonia produced by this industrial process. In a very real sense, billions of people owe part of their existence to a reaction that takes place inside steel vessels, hundreds of degrees hot and under pressures many times greater than the atmosphere. Yet this same invention also transformed warfare. During the First World War, it allowed Germany to manufacture explosives after losing access to its natural nitrate supplies, helping extend a conflict that claimed millions of lives. A process created to prevent famine became equally capable of sustaining war. And its story does not end there. By dramatically increasing the amount of reactive nitrogen circulating through the environment, it altered one of Earth's oldest natural cycles. Rivers, lakes, coastal waters, and even the atmosphere now carry the consequences of a technological breakthrough made more than a century ago. Few inventions have reshaped civilization so completely while remaining almost invisible to the people whose lives depend on them. The remarkable part is that none of this began with a revolutionary new material or an abundant natural resource. It began with a simple question that seemed almost impossible to answer. If nearly 80% of the air around us is nitrogen, why was the world running out of it? 4 out of every 5 molecules entering your lungs are nitrogen. Yet neither humans, animals, nor crops can use that vast reservoir directly. The reason lies in the nitrogen molecule itself. 2 nitrogen atoms are locked together by one of the strongest chemical bonds found in nature, a triple bond that makes the gas remarkably stable. For most living organisms, atmospheric nitrogen is effectively inaccessible. Life depends instead on reactive nitrogen, compounds such as ammonia and nitrate that plants can absorb through their roots. Once inside a plant, nitrogen becomes part of proteins, DNA, and chlorophyll, eventually moving through the food chain to every animal, including ourselves. For thousands of years, nature supplied reactive nitrogen at a limited pace. Certain bacteria living in soil and within the roots of legumes could convert atmospheric nitrogen into usable forms. Lightning occasionally split nitrogen molecules apart, allowing them to react with oxygen before returning to the ground in rain. These natural pathways sustained agriculture, but only within strict limits. As populations expanded during the 19th century, those limits became increasingly apparent. Farmers could improve yields with crop rotation, animal manure, and compost, but each method recycled existing nutrients rather than creating significant new supplies. Every harvest removed nitrogen from the soil, and restoring fertility became more difficult as demand for food continued to rise. Industrializing nations searched desperately for richer sources of nitrogen. The answer seemed to lie thousands of kilometers away, in the Atacama Desert of northern Chile. There, enormous deposits of sodium nitrate, often called Chilean nitrate or Chile's saltpeter, accumulated over millions of years. The mineral became one of the world's most valuable strategic resources. Ships carried hundreds of thousands of tons across the oceans each year, supplying farms with fertilizer and factories with the raw material needed for explosives. This dependence created a dangerous vulnerability. A handful of desert deposits had become essential to feeding growing populations and sustaining modern industry. If those supplies were exhausted or cut off, there was no obvious replacement. In 1898, the British chemist Sir William Crookes warned that humanity was approaching exactly that crisis. Addressing the British Association for the Advancement of Science, he argued that population growth was beginning to outpace the Earth's natural ability to replenish usable nitrogen. Unless science found a way to capture the vast reservoir floating above every field and every city, widespread food shortages were no longer a distant possibility. They were an approaching certainty. Crookes was asking chemists to do something that nature itself accomplished only sparingly: break one of chemistry's strongest molecular bonds and transform ordinary air into food. For decades, that challenge appeared impossible. Chemists already knew the reaction they wanted. Combine nitrogen with hydrogen, and ammonia should form. On paper, it was straightforward. In practice, almost nothing happened. The problem was the nitrogen molecule itself. Its triple bond was so stable that ordinary temperatures left it virtually untouched. Raising the temperature helped break the bond, but introduced a new problem. Ammonia synthesis is an exothermic reaction, meaning it releases heat. According to the laws of chemical equilibrium, higher temperatures also encourage the newly formed ammonia to decompose back into nitrogen and hydrogen. The very conditions needed to accelerate the reaction reduced the amount of ammonia that could ultimately be produced. It was a classic engineering dilemma. Low temperatures favored the final product, but made the reaction painfully slow. High temperatures increased the reaction rate, but worked against the desired outcome. Pressure offered a way forward. Because the reaction converts 4 molecules of gas into 2, increasing pressure shifts the equilibrium toward ammonia. The challenge was finding operating conditions where pressure, temperature, and reaction speed all work together rather than against one another. One of the scientists pursuing this problem was the German physical chemist Fritz Haber. Early experiments produced only tiny amounts of ammonia, and many researchers doubted that industrial synthesis would ever become practical. Then another scientist challenged his work. Walther Nernst, one of the leading theoretical chemists of the era, calculated that Haber's published measurements were inconsistent with thermodynamic theory. The disagreement became public, culminating in a heated confrontation at a scientific meeting in Hamburg in 1907. Rather than ending Haber's research, the criticism strengthened it. Working with the British engineer Robert Le Rossignol, Haber redesigned his experimental apparatus from the ground up. Their new system operated at increasingly higher pressures and measured the reaction with far greater precision. Eventually, the experiments confirmed that Nernst's theoretical calculations had been correct. But they also revealed something far more important. High pressure was not merely improving the measurements. It was the key to making ammonia synthesis practical. By 1909, Haber and Le Rossignol had constructed a laboratory reactor capable of continuously producing liquid ammonia. During a demonstration for representatives of the German chemical company BASF, the apparatus produced roughly 0.5 kilogram of ammonia over several hours. It was a modest quantity, but it proved that atmospheric nitrogen could get into a useful chemical product under controlled industrial conditions. Even then, one obstacle remained. Passing the gases through the reactor converted only a small fraction into ammonia before equilibrium was reached. Simply venting the remaining nitrogen and hydrogen would make the process far too expensive. Haber's solution was elegantly simple. Instead of discarding the unreacted gases, the reactor cooled its output until the ammonia condensed into liquid. The remaining nitrogen and hydrogen were compressed, mixed with fresh feed gas, and sent back through the reactor again. Over time, each pass converted a little more of the mixture, turning a poor single-pass yield into an efficient continuous process. This closed-loop recycling system became known as the Haber loop, and it remains a defining feature of ammonia plants today. The chemistry had finally been solved. The far greater challenge was building machines capable of performing it every hour of every day without tearing themselves apart. BASF immediately recognized the significance of Haber's demonstration and purchased the rights to the process. Turning a laboratory apparatus into a factory, however, required solving problems that chemistry alone could not answer. The first obstacle was the catalyst. Haber's successful experiments relied on osmium, a rare metal capable of accelerating ammonia formation under high pressure. It worked well in the laboratory, but was hopeless for industrial production. The world's supply of osmium amounted to only a few kilograms, while a commercial plant would require tons. Uranium showed promise as well, but it was expensive, difficult to handle, and easily poisoned by trace impurities. The search for a practical catalyst fell to BASF chemist Alwin Mittasch. Instead of relying on intuition, Mittasch approached the problem systematically. Between 1909 and 1912, his team tested more than 2,500 catalyst formulations across over 6,500 experiments. Custom-built miniature reactors ran continuously, allowing dozens of samples to be evaluated under real operating conditions. It was one of the earliest examples of large-scale, high-throughput materials research. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A sample of magnetite ore from northern Sweden consistently outperformed carefully prepared pure iron catalysts. The secret was not the iron alone, but tiny naturally occurring impurities within the mineral. These substances acted as promoters, improving the catalyst's activity, stability, and resistance to degradation, without directly participating in the reaction themselves. By carefully reproducing this composition, BASF developed an inexpensive iron-based catalyst that could be manufactured in industrial quantities. More than a century later, modern ammonia plants still rely on iron catalysts built upon the same fundamental principle. Yet an even greater challenge emerged as engineers began constructing larger reactors. The chemistry demanded temperatures approaching 500 degrees Celsius and pressures around 200 atmospheres. Under these conditions, the thick carbon steel vessels repeatedly failed. Reactors swelled, cracked, and sometimes ruptured after only a few days of operation. At first, the failures appeared to be purely mechanical. Carl Bosch discovered they were chemical. Hydrogen molecules striking the hot steel split into individual hydrogen atoms. These tiny atoms diffused deep into the metal, where they reacted with iron carbide, a compound responsible for much of the steel's strength. The reaction produced methane trapped inside the metal itself. Unable to escape, the gas accumulated along grain boundaries, building enormous internal pressure while simultaneously stripping carbon from the steel. The vessel became weaker from within until microscopic cracks spread into catastrophic failure. Today, this phenomenon is known as high-temperature hydrogen attack. Rather than searching for a perfect alloy that did not yet exist, Bosch reimagined the reactor itself. He designed a double-walled pressure vessel. A soft, carbon-free iron liner contained the hot hydrogen, while a separate outer shell carried the mechanical load. Between them, carefully machined channels allowed any hydrogen diffusing through the inner wall to escape harmlessly through small pressure relief openings known as Bosch holes or weep holes, preventing dangerous pressure from building inside the structure. It was an elegant engineering solution. Instead of trying to eliminate hydrogen entirely, Bosch accepted that some hydrogen would always penetrate the metal and designed the reactor to manage it safely. By solving the intertwined problems of catalysis, metallurgy, and high-pressure engineering, Carl Bosch transformed Haber's laboratory discovery into the world's first large-scale high-pressure chemical process. The technology was finally ready. Its first great test would not come from agriculture, but from war. In 1914, the Haber-Bosch process was still a young technology. Then Europe went to war. For decades, Germany had depended on imports of Chilean nitrate, a natural source of reactive nitrogen essential for both fertilizer and explosives. When the First World War began, the British Royal Navy imposed a naval blockade that effectively cut Germany off from those overseas supplies. The consequences extended far beyond agriculture. Modern explosives require nitric acid, which in turn requires fixed nitrogen. Before the war, much of that nitrogen came directly from Chilean nitrate. Without a replacement, Germany faced the prospect of running out of the raw materials needed to manufacture ammunition. The Haber-Bosch process provided one. Ammonia produced from air and hydrogen could be converted into nitric acid through the Ostwald process. That nitric acid became the precursor for explosives such as TNT and ammonium nitrate. What had been developed to address a looming food crisis suddenly became a strategic military asset. Carl Bosch assured German military leaders that industrial ammonia production could replace imported nitrate. BASF rapidly expanded production, converting existing facilities and constructing massive new plants such as Oppau and Luna. These factories became part of Germany's wartime industrial backbone, producing the nitrogen compounds required to sustain both agriculture and munitions manufacturing. Many historians argue that without synthetic ammonia, Germany would have exhausted its explosive supplies far earlier in the war. Instead, domestic nitrogen production helped prolong a conflict that had already become one of attrition. The process had revealed its dual nature. The same ammonia molecule could nourish a wheat field or become part of an artillery shell. The chemistry was identical, only its destination differed. No individual embodied that contradiction more than Fritz Haber. In 1918, he received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for developing the synthesis of ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen, a discovery that would eventually support global food production on an unprecedented scale. Just a few years earlier, however, Haber had also become a leading advocate of chemical warfare. Convinced that poison gas could break the deadlock of trench warfare and shorten the conflict, he directed Germany's first large-scale chlorine gas attack at Ypres in April 1915. Thousands of Allied soldiers were caught in the drifting cloud, marking the beginning of modern chemical warfare. To Haber, the distinction between scientific research and military service barely existed. He believed that a scientist owed complete loyalty to the state during wartime. His wife, Clara Immerwahr, saw the situation very differently. A pioneering chemist in her own right, Clara regarded the weaponization of chemistry as a profound betrayal of science's purpose. She openly opposed her husband's work, arguing that scientific knowledge should improve human life rather than become a tool for mass killing. Only days after the attack at Ypres, Clara died by suicide at their home. The following morning, Fritz Haber left for the Eastern Front to oversee additional gas operations. That deeply personal tragedy has become inseparable from the history of the Haber-Bosch process. It illustrates how one scientific breakthrough can carry consequences far beyond the laboratory, shaped not only by chemistry and engineering, but also by the choices of the people who wield it. When the war ended, the factories that had supplied explosives gradually returned to their original purpose, producing fertilizer. And in the decades that followed, their greatest influence would be measured not in battles won, but in lives sustained. In the decades after the First World War, the Haber-Bosch process quietly became one of the foundations of modern civilization. The transformation accelerated after the Second World War. As global populations grew rapidly, agriculture faced a familiar challenge, producing more food from a finite amount of land. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer became part of the answer. Combined with improved irrigation, mechanization, and new high-yield crop varieties developed during the Green Revolution, ammonia-based fertilizers dramatically increased agricultural productivity. Wheat, rice, and maize could absorb far greater amounts of nitrogen than traditional farming methods had ever supplied, allowing harvests to rise without an equivalent expansion of farmland. The scale of that change is difficult to overstate. Researchers estimate that between 30 and 50% of today's global crop production depends directly on synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Over time, the influence of the Haber-Bosch process became so extensive that roughly half of the world's population came to rely on food grown with industrially fixed nitrogen. The connection reaches even deeper. The proteins that build human muscles, organs, and cells all contain nitrogen. Scientists estimate that about half of the nitrogen atoms in the average human body can ultimately be traced back to ammonia produced inside a Haber-Bosch reactor. A technology invented more than a century ago has become part of billions of people, one atom at a time. But nature was never designed for such quantities of reactive nitrogen. For millions of years, Earth's nitrogen cycle remained in a relatively stable balance. Microorganisms fixed atmospheric nitrogen at a limited rate, plants absorbed what they needed, and decomposition gradually returned nitrogen to the atmosphere. Human industry fundamentally changed that balance by producing reactive nitrogen on a scale comparable to, and now exceeding, many natural terrestrial processes. Not all of that nitrogen reaches crops. In many farming systems, plants absorb only about half of the fertilizer applied to the soil. The remainder escapes into the environment through several pathways. Some dissolves as nitrate and washes into groundwater and rivers. Some evaporates into the atmosphere as ammonia. Soil microbes convert part of it into nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas far more potent than carbon dioxide over a century-long timescale. Excess nutrients carried into lakes and coastal waters stimulate massive algal blooms, which consume oxygen as they decay and create expanding dead zones, where fish and other aquatic life struggle to survive. These consequences were not understood by Haber or Bosch. Their challenge was immediate and urgent: prevent a future in which humanity could no longer produce enough food. They succeeded. The process they helped create removed one of the greatest biological limits on civilization. It allowed billions of additional people to be fed, supported the agricultural systems on which modern societies depend, and became a cornerstone of chemical engineering. At the same time, it reshaped warfare, altered global geopolitics, and pushed the Earth's nitrogen cycle beyond its historical boundaries. More than a century later, the Haber-Bosch process remains a paradox that has never truly been resolved. Human civilization depends on it, yet continues to grapple with its consequences. Few inventions have influenced so many lives while remaining so largely invisible. Every harvest, every meal, and every breath taken above fields nourished by synthetic fertilizer carries the legacy of a breakthrough that transformed the most abundant gas in the atmosphere into one of the defining technologies of the modern world.